Okay, guys. You'll forgive the candlelight. It's Kyiv, right? We're having problems with the power, as you know. Uh, this is a paid members only special report, if you will. The situation in Syria is critically important to Ukraine, in point of fact. And we'll talk about why, as I understand the situation right now, because this is a whole new geopolitical environment that I have very little familiarity with. So, as I understand it today, let's talk about Syria, Assad, HTS, Russia, and the Kurds, who at this juncture nobody's even mentioning. But I think that's important too. So today is Sunday, December the 1st. It's day 1012 of the full scale invasion. And we turn our attention to Syria. And this whole white area here that you see, this is the new territory that the rebels have expanded out of. All of this pale green up top here, this all is territory held by HTS. And we'll talk about HTS in a minute. This pink territory is what's held by um, the forces of Bashir al Assad, the regime in Damascus. Damascus is down here toward the south, tucked just behind Lebanon. This white area on the Mediterranean Sea is Lebanon here. And this area is controlled by the Turkey backed rebels. So it's an interesting dynamic with Turkey included in the mix on the other side of Russia, which is interesting. Um, why is Russia here? Why does Russia care? Because Russia's got two critical assets in Syria. They have the Tartus uh, seaport. There's a naval base there, a Russian Federation naval base there. This is the Mediterranean Sea over here on the left. This blue marker indicates the location of the Tartus naval base on the Mediterranean. If we zoom in for a satellite close up of the Russian Federation naval base, you can see that they've got some ships here, right? Here's the Tartus port. And this is important to them. This base serves as a servicing station, and we believe it's been heavily involved in supporting the shadow fleet that gets all of that oil out illicitly around the ban, right? And around the price cap. So to lose this asset is to lose the Russian presence in the Mediterranean and its short logistical supply hub for all of its ships there. That's critical. That's critical. Further, Russia has the Himenim Air Base, which is located just north of the Tartus port. Now, it's the air base that's important to them. And unfortunately, I was unable to find good satellite photos of the air base. The names on these things are not consistent in translation. And most of the time, I just didn't know what I was really looking at. So, at any rate, there is an air base here. Now, as I understand it, Russia's involvement in the Syrian war hasn't been so much of boots on the ground, although there's some of that, some limited uh, infantry support. But where the real sledgehammer for the Russians is in Syria on behalf of the Assad regime is in its air power. Russia basically carpet bombed the shit out of anybody that was housing rebels. So lots of civilians, whole villages, towns just leveled. It's the same one trick pony that Russia is, and what we see the Russians doing with glide bombs in the east of Ukraine, just leveling everything, irregardless, irrespective of the existence of civilians there in the population. Now, as we understand it, Assad went to Moscow last night, yesterday, the Saturday, the 30th of November. He was in Moscow and met with Putin. He has left Moscow this morning, Sunday, this 1st of December. The word is he left with nothing, with absolutely nothing he asked for. Now, we don't know that yet to be true. We're going to have to wait and see. But the word on the street is that Putin can't give him anything. Putin gave him back the vast majority control over his country. He's got to step up now and take care of this. And for their part, Syria is sending reinforcements and troops to Aleppo, the second largest city in Syria that had been occupied and is now under the rebel control. And for its part, Russia is doing bombing runs again. Right now, this is the first time in 8 years of this 13-year war that Russia is making airstrikes inside of Syria. This is a school. It's Russia, right? They're not. Their weapons are not precise, and they don't frankly care. And so we see the Russian Air Force in Syria engaging in its reckless behavior, as it always does. And the question is, how much ammunition can Russia supply? If it can't supply any more for whatever these Su-24s are carrying down in Syria, if Putin's told Assad that he's got to go out and buy his own bombs once the stockpile is gone, that's going to be a problem for the Assad regime. Now, look, Assad is a brutal dictator. He's gonna put up a fight, right? He's not looking for a ride, let's say, not at this point anyway. But it is worth pointing out that these guys, HTS, the rebels that have taken Aleppo and other cities in the northern part of Syria there, these guys are only 80 miles from that Himenim air base, less than 100 from Tartus port. Should they seize those Russian assets, and by the way, we've seen them seizing the tanks that the Russians have left behind, the BTRs that the Russians have left behind, the infantry fighting vehicles the Russians have left behind, the armored personnel carriers, we've seen them grab that equipment. So as the Russians have fled before them, these guys are picking up everything they leave behind. Now, who are they? They are the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And the best translation I have for that right now is the life of Tahrir al-Sham. And I don't know if that's a Islamist school of thought, if it's a physical place, if it's a person, if it's all of the above. But I'm sure that we'll be able to get more information about that in the near future. Now, who they are is an Islamist militant group. They were formerly Al-Qaeda in Syria, but they broke with Al-Qaeda in 2017. Now, this gives us all pause, right? These are not the kind of guy, I mean, as bad as Assad is. What about the persecution of women, Christian minorities, etc., under guys like this? Well, for their part, their public statements are quite moderate right now. In their defense, they have said publicly that all civilians are to be protected, including Christians. I have not seen anything addressing other ethnic groups. I'm not sure how many other ethnic groups or religious groups there are inside of Syria these days. But for their part, they are making these public pronouncements. Now, we'll see whether or not they stick to that. But they are gaining ground, boy. They're moving fast. Now, this is all important because should Russia lose these key assets, the world has already seen Russia fail to come to the aid of Azerbaijan in the Nagorno Karabakh debacle last year, in which Azeri troops went right up against a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, right? Putin's Dollar Tree NATO, and be completely impotent to do anything about it. Even when their own officers were killed, 9 officers uh, were unalived by the Azeris. In 9 Russian officers were unalived by the Azeris in that conflict, and Putin did nothing. On the contrary, he held an energy conference in Baku and gave a lot of very money making gas rights to the Azeris. So everybody saw that failure of Russian foreign diplomacy and failure of its security agreements with other nations. And the reason, of course, that it couldn't do anything, the reason it ended up pulling out of Armenia completely, was because it needed every man and every piece of equipment it could get on the front. Russia's already pulled lots of equipment and men out of Syria. It appears that Putin is telling Assad, I don't have any more to give you. For Putin to lose now in Syria after losing in Armenia is a blow to hit his image of who he is and the great, powerful, unstoppable Russian motherland, right? Which can never be defeated. This guy goes down, and I'm not suggesting in any way that we are anywhere close to the end of the Assad regime, but should Assad go down, if Putin fails to protect him, what is the incentive for anybody else in the world to cozy up to Putin? And Putin is trying to make himself the leader of half the world, right? As he positioned himself at the recent BRICS conference. Who's going to want to stick with a guy who abandons you when your enemies take up arms? So it'll be very interesting to see the way that this plays out. Now, the silver lining in this thing, the thing that personally uh, is exciting to me, is that should the Assad regime come to an end, we might see some justice for the Kurds. Now, if you don't know who the Kurds are, there are about 30 million people that live in these places, and they are the world's single largest minority without a home nation, without a modern nation state to call their home. Why is that? Well, for the same reason that the Ukrainians didn't get an independent Ukraine at the end of World War I. When the great powers met in Paris, France, to divide the world up, you had to get a seat at the table in order to get a homeland to call your own. The Kurds didn't manage it. Neither did the Ukrainians. And so these large ethnic groups with their own language, culture, and history were cut out of the nation, the modern nation making process. And let's face, and this is what everybody forgets. The modern nation making process is just that. It's 100 years old. That end of World War I. Before that, we had empires, and those depended on your conquering other people. And not everybody that was conquered got their own country at the end of World War I. Right? Just ask the Basques in France and Spain. Ask the Kurds in Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Iraq. Now, there's about 9% of the Syrian population is in fact Kurdish and lives mostly in the east south part of the country. No, I'm sorry, the northeast part of the country. My apologies, northeast part of the country. And uh, there are currently U.S. forces still embedded with them. We've been working with the Kurds in Iraq in what is known as the independent state of Kurdistan for 20 years now, since the Iraq invasion, and with the Kurds in Iran. We were working with them before the coming of the Ayatollah, and we have repeatedly abandoned them. Repeatedly abandoned them 4 times now in history. So my great hope here would be that out of this chaos and the potential failure of an Assad regime, you might see a chunk of Syria move toward a relationship with Kurdistan. We don't know, right? That's all very up in the air and very speculative, but it would be my great hope that because the Ukrainians and the Kurds had that very similar history. In Paris, when the great powers carved up the world, they both got shut out and were split up and absorbed by other empires or the remnants of these empires. Now, the final thought that I want to express here is that these rebels are only able to do this because the Iranian-backed Hezbollah forces were decimated by Israel. Israel own right, and the Iranian Hezbollah forces support Assad, right? Hezbollah, Assad, Iran, Russia, Hezbollah, Assad, Iran, Hamas, too. Now, the Israeli forces only decimated the Hezbollah forces in Syria because of the war that Hamas started with Israel on October 7th, 2023. Putin's birthday. Come on. That war was funded, the forces were trained, and the idea for it came from the Kremlin. They put the Mideast in this hot phase. The irony that this could now backfire and Russia could lose Syria is just the perfect metaphor for how every decision this guy has made has rebounded in his face. We are so close on this thing. And I am very frightened that Donald Trump is going to extend it much longer than it needs to by coming in and saving Putin's ass. But we shall see. We shall see. All right, that is what I know about what's happening in Syria right now and why I think it's important to Ukraine. If Russia sends forces there, that will diminish the forces they can send to Ukraine. If Russia doesn't send forces there, it's because they are so stretched they can barely deal with Ukraine. They are hanging on by their fingernails. And all of that is good for Ukraine. And of course, any hit to Putin's reputation, that's good for Ukraine. So thanks. I hope you found that interesting. Feedback welcome in the comments. Thanks.